Good evening. Hope you all had a lovely week. I'm really noticing the change in weather and the dark. Oh, isn't it dark so early? And it does make it more difficult to keep yourself motivated and working later on when it's starting to get first signs of darkness beginning to come in about 4 o'clock at night. As you can probably tell, I'm recording this now in November if you're catching up on this on my YouTube channel. But if you're watching live, welcome tonight. And tonight is a nutrition in the news topics. I try and change things up a little bit. If I see interesting articles, I like to analyse them and bring you the findings that I think you'll find interesting, because often when you see a headline in a newspaper or online, or you might hear something in a radio, we can be very quick to jump to conclusions as to what it might mean. And so I've looked at a new study here that I'm going to talk about, and I've sort of looked behind the headlines to look at what's really going on and why the findings might be as they are, which might not be what it's expected. So let me go on and talk about this. And I've talked about this. I gave the headline earlier on when I said I was going live tonight. Is plant-based meat better than animal meat for lowering inflammation in the body? And I put apparently not. So let me tell you more about this study. It was just published very recently, 23rd of September, so it's a new study. It's a very small study. I'll give you a bit more information about that in a moment. So we do need to bear in mind it's limited study, small scale, small length of time. You know, we do need to do more research. That's what the researchers are saying. It's very limited. We need to look into it further. And what they were looking at were particularly cardiovascular health markers, but in the area of inflammation. So there's lots of different types of ways of measuring inflammation in the body. We don't need to go into the scientific information about that, but they were looking at inflammatory markers that are particular risk for cardiovascular disease, but we know inflammation causes lots of problems throughout the whole body. And the results were not what the authors were expecting. As they stated in the report, these results do not support our hypothesis that biomarkers of inflammation would improve by following a plant-based meat diet. And it's the meat word that we're going to investigate further. So let's look a bit more into the study. It was very limited. It was only carried out over 16 weeks. It was just 36 healthy adults. So a very, very small study. Average age was 50, 67% were female. They had no underlying health conditions. They weren't excluding any particular foods prior to starting this diet. You know, they weren't vegan or vegetarian or anything like that beforehand. So they were just following just a standard type diet, if there's such a thing as standard type diet. And what they did is they split them into two groups, and one group followed an animal meat diet for 8 weeks, whilst the other group did a plant-based meat diet for 8 weeks, and then they switched over. And what they did is they took blood samples at the start of the trial, at the end of the first 8 weeks, and then at the end of the final 8 weeks at 16 weeks. And so they could look at the findings of these inflammatory markers, and a lot of different inflammatory markers that they were looking at. And other than providing these meat type products, they were left to just follow the rest of the diet themselves. So they didn't specify how many vegetables they had to eat, or fruit, or nuts and seeds, or fish, or anything like that at all. They were just given, right, eat these meat products or eat these plant-based meat products. And they had to consume 2 or more servings of these meat type products on a daily basis for the entire 8 weeks before they then switched to the other diet. Now, what was consumed? Now, this is what's interesting. So let's think about the true animal meat products. And there was a list of these, and I haven't put a list of all of these in the study, but they were eating unprocessed grass-fed beef mince or chicken breast. And there was some processed meats in the form of beef burgers or pork sausages. So there were some pork sausages, some beef burgers, but the rest of it was pure beef mince that they would then cook however they wanted to, and chicken breasts. So that was the animal meat products. The plant meats were provided by a particular company. The company was called Beyond Meat. And I want to stress here, this is not, I'm not, I don't want to lay any criticism at this particular company, because I don't think it would have mattered which plant-based manufacturing food company was chosen for this study, because I do think that any plant-based meat product is going to be made in a fairly similar way. Now, the plant meat is processed, and at the end of the day, it is ultra processed. And what do I mean by that is it's gone through, it's got a lot of different ingredients in it, and it's gone through quite a high manufacturing process. I've done another recording not that long ago, back in the summer this year, about ultra processed foods, and these do fall into that category of ultra processed foods, as do probably beef burgers, and definitely pork sausages would form into the category of an ultra processed food. But the plant-based meat consumed here has to be ultra processed, because the only way you can make something look like meat when it's not meat is to put a lot of ingredients into it to make it look like meat. So it is ultra processed. The plant protein came from pea protein, and I don't have a problem with that. I use pea protein powders a lot. When I make smoothies, I always add a protein, and often it's a pea protein. I don't have any problem with that. There were quite a number of ingredients used, and a lot of the ingredients were herbs and things like that, and vegetables, which is great. But there were quite significant levels of sodium in the products, and mostly, this is the key thing for me, they were using quite cheap seed oils to make these products. Typically canola, and sunflower oil. And when you look at your ingredients, this applies to anything. When you go into a shop and you buy a product that is processed, and you're reading the ingredients on the back of it, the order that the ingredients are listed are that they have to put them in the highest quantity order. So the number one is, like, often you might see water as number one listed. That means there's more water in the product than anything else. And as you go down that list, you get smaller and smaller the amount quantity included in the product. And typically in these plant-based meat products, these oils were listed third on the packaging ingredient, which means that, there was a lot of these seed oils. So, they have to do that. Now, the outcomes, as I said, they were looking at these inflammatory markers. And at the end of, from the start and at the 8 weeks and at the 16 weeks, there was no statistical difference in the biomarkers of inflammation, comparing the baseline at the start and following each type of meat diet at 8 weeks and 16 weeks. There was no statistical significant difference in the biomarkers of inflammation. So my thoughts, I think I've given you an inkling as to what I'm going to say here. First of all, we do need to bear in mind it's a limited study. 36 adults following each diet for 8 weeks. It's very, very small scale, but they tend to start, when they do studies, they tend to start with very small scale. And if they find something that's interesting, it would normally be followed up as, something bigger. And I would have thought they'd find this quite interesting, and they'd want to look, if they get the funding, to do a bigger size scale study. Now, let's start with the fact that a plant-based diet, and please don't shoot the messenger here, a plant-based diet doesn't necessarily mean it is going to be healthy. Of course, if it is a nutrient-dense, vegetables, nuts, seeds, pulses, lentils, add in some tofu, soy-based products, you're heading in the right direction. But when you're consuming ultra-processed foods twice a day, it's not a healthy diet. We don't, of course, know what else they were eating, but that is not going to be healthy for you. There is growing concern with the things that I follow and read about a lot, there is growing concern about the high intake, not just for these plant-based meats, but generally in the Western world, maybe in other diets as well around the world now. There is growing concern of the amount of pro-inflammatory seed oils that are being consumed, and typically they are coming in the form of processed foods. But I would never ever recommend anyone cooks with cheap vegetable oils or sunflower oil or canola oil or anything like that at all. I cook with olive oil. You can use coconut oil, and actually butter are going to be much better for you. These cheap seed oils are known to be pro-inflammatory to the body. It's so important. So of course these products contained a lot of those. The second thing is that the animal meat diet we know was just pure meat, and there was some processed meat in there, but it wasn't all, it was a mixture. And I think, again, it's worth pointing out that whilst animal meat may be higher in saturated fat, again, there is growing research to show that saturated fat is not a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. There's going to be plenty of things out there that's going to tell you otherwise, but we've got to look beyond the fat as the problem here. We've got to look at things like cheap seed oils. We've got to look at sugar and insulin. We've got to look at the lack of antioxidant type foods like vegetables and fruit in people's diets. We can't just put all the blame on saturated fat. It's a much bigger issue than that. And saturated fat on its own, well, not on its own, but when you are including that as part of a good balanced diet with lots of vegetables and other things like that, it's not considered to be the major contributor of cardiovascular disease and a pro-inflammatory state in the body. That might surprise some of you. Lots of research around that. Highly processed foods, so let's go back to this. They are associated with increased weight gain and increased risk for a number of leading chronic diseases. As I said, I've done another video, it's in my YouTube thing, and when this is written as a blog, and it will be going on my website, Peyton Principles. All my blogs then go on my website, and I will be including the link so you can easily find the other article I wrote, the blog about ultra processed foods that I did earlier this year. And we know that the plant-based meat products used in this study come under the definition of ultra processed foods, unfortunately. So as the author stated, just to finish, I'll just read this to you. An overall healthy plant-based diet without processed fake meats may have yielded different results, since the focus of plant-based diets is to maximize the consumption of nutrient-dense foods like fruit, vegetables, nuts and whole grains and seeds, whilst minimizing the consumption of processed foods and animal foods. So if the study had been done differently without looking at plant-based meats, it could have been very different. Now, at the end of the day, we're all human, and I always say to people and all my clients and you lovely listeners and followers that to me it's about everything in moderation. Well, lots of plants need to be in high amounts, but you know, it's like having a little bit of alcohol or a little bit of cake occasionally. The same with plant-based meats or eating a burger or eating a sausage. You know, if you're balancing that with a highly anti-inflammatory diet most of the time, it's not going to be a significant factor. Of course, for this diet, it was 2 portions of ultra processed meats, plant-based meats, twice a day for 8 weeks. It doesn't surprise me that it didn't lower inflammation. In my view, over a longer period of time, it could increase inflammation, but you know, you've got to look at the bigger picture of what's being consumed. So I hope that's of interest to you. Please don't shoot the messenger. I'm giving you the findings. I know vegetarians and vegans get highly sensitive about, you know, their diets and being healthy, and full respect to them. I have full respect to anybody who wants to follow that sort of diet. I respect my clients that want to follow that diet. But I think we have to bear in mind that you have to work a lot harder to stay healthy and make sure you're getting all the right nutrients into your diet. And of course, if you're cooking from scratch, fantastic. It's when we need to cut corners on a regular basis by buying, you know, something that looks like a meat that can potentially have its its pitfalls that we need to watch out for. So thank you for watching. I will be back next week. Haven't chosen my topic yet. Lots of ideas, but I will be giving you advance warning of what I'm going to talk about, but always be aware 6 o'clock is when these things start. Thanks for watching. Have a great week. Take care. Bye.